Thank you very much. What I want to do in the next couple of minutes is try really hard to connect three different experiences. The first is an experience that I've had more than a few times, which is that I am a homeowner, which is really wonderful, but has all sorts of responsibilities that I didn't know much about. And one of them is that I need to actually keep things fairly neat and tidy, which I'm not very comfortable with. And so I've had this experience a couple of times, which is that I will be in my house, and I have a partner, and we will be looking outside, and out on our lawn will be a piece of trash. Many of you may have had a similar experience. And I will go to remove that piece of trash. And on the way to removing the piece of trash, the wind will blow the trash into the neighbor's yard. And naturally, I think to myself, all right, I want to connect that with two other things that I want to tell you about or talk to you about. The next thing is, it's maybe we would say the opposite of all of this mindful stuff. I want to talk to you about evil. And particularly, I've spent a number of years studying evil, and particularly studying the work of Hannah Arendt, who's a 20th century German philosopher who lived through and studied the Nazis. She wrote a book in 1961, which was published in the United States in 1963, about a guy named Adolf Eichmann, who was somewhere up in the higher ranks of the Nazis. And his particular skill and his particular strength was organizing. He was really good at organizing things. He made his name in the among the Nazis because before the Nazis decided to kill Jews, they decided just to get all of the Jews out of Germany. And particularly the way they wanted to do that was just to get them someplace else. The problem was that there was so much bureaucracy in Nazi Germany at the time that a Jew, even who wanted to leave, would have to go from one office to get one kind of stamp to another office to get another kind of stamp to another office. And each of the stamps had a very, very strict time limit. So you got 8 hours from the first office, and you'd run into a long line at the second office. And then you'd run into a long line at the third office. And what Eichmann was really brilliant at is figuring out the way this bureaucracy was getting in the way of the goals that the Nazis had. So he got all of the offices together, lined them up. Jews would start on one end with a passport and all of their things, go through office after office, get stamp after stamp after stamp, and get to the end with a ticket out and nothing. He, using this fame that he was particularly good at organizing things, ends up really running the train system for the Nazis for years and years. Okay, so once again, I'm going to try to connect these three. The first piece is my looking out at my lawn and seeing trash. The second piece is Adolf Eichmann and what makes him evil. And the third piece is an experience I had actually at a business a bunch of years ago. I was at a business, and among other things, one of the things I did, because I was the only local involved with the business, was I wrote directions for us to give to potential candidates when they were coming to interview for a job. So we would get on the phone and we would interview people, and then if we really liked them, we would say, why don't you come to interview, and here are the directions. Well, at one point there was an argument about the directions that I had written, which I actually want to be clear were really, really accurate, but someone else screwed up. And she complained to my boss. And she said, the directions were really bad, I'm really mad, I was supposed to be there an hour ago, and I'm driving around on 95, and I can't tell if it's 95 or 128, and my boss said, I wrote those directions. So if there's a problem, let me see if I can help you. So I want to connect these three things. And the way I connect them is to think about a way that we misunderstand people. Particularly, particularly the faculty, we spend a lot of time saying things about students if we're in one of those X moods as opposed to Y moods. If we're in an X mood and things have been going badly and we're cranky and it's finals time, we say things like, students just don't care. They're all apathetic. They wouldn't care less if, and then you can fill in what it is that they wouldn't care less about. So we talk about apathy a lot. Why don't students show up to an event? Why don't they protest? Why aren't they more engaged? Why don't they show up to class? Whatever it is, we use the word apathy a lot. And the word apathy actually refers to an emotion of not caring. What I want to suggest is that when we do that, we're actually missing something more important. And I want to suggest that by returning to this example of Adolf Eichmann. So Arendt goes to Jerusalem in 1961 for the Adolf Eichmann trial. This is after the Nuremberg trials. And what she finds is, unbeknownst to her and really quite surprising to just about everyone, Eichmann doesn't fit into any of the categories we normally think of evildoers fitting into. He's not crazy. He's not anti-Semitic, which is really, really weird. He's not doing it because it's going to make him rich or because he's got an unbelievable sense of self-interest or cutthroatness or... So all of our normal ways of thinking about why a person does evil really falls apart. And what she finds instead is that what made Eichmann do what he did, among other things, and there were a few connected things, but one of the primary things that he does is he lets other people make decisions for him. So he went to a conference, the Wannsee conference outside of Berlin, where the higher-up Nazis decided that what they were going to do with the Jews was kill them all. This is called the final solution. And nobody said that this was a bad idea. And so Eichmann figured, well, if nobody else thinks it's a bad idea, who am I to judge otherwise? And this who am I to judge otherwise is really the key to connecting all of these. And it connects through this term that I've coined called a-responsibility. In the same way that we have moral, immoral, and amoral, there's also what I would propose is responsible, irresponsible, and a-responsible. And the way I define a-responsibility is the experience one has of not having to do anything about some state of the world. So it's not a feeling. I can be a-responsible without any feeling at all about it. And in fact, it's true of us at every single moment in an infinite amount. There are an infinite number of things you do not feel responsible for changing right now. Often, that's good. Actually, you shouldn't feel responsible about changing them. So my jeans are a little long. You should not feel responsible to have had these jeans appropriately fit. And frankly, I'd be a little worried if you thought that was your responsibility. There are all sorts of, I would say, an infinite number of things you ought not be responsible about. But what I want to highlight is the way our understanding of responsibility can be manufactured and can be changed by other people in ways that we might not normally realize. So our sense of what we can be responsible and ought to be responsible for can be influenced by other people, sometimes in really banal and easy ways. We're not walking down the street and something is going on, so I'm walking down the street with my friend Nim, who's in my apartment, and there's a piece of trash, and Nim says, "Oh, I got it." The moment he says, "I got it," I no longer feel responsible to pick up that piece of paper. So he can, in fact, influence, in fact, we do all the time, each other's sense of what we are responsible for. I think every single student has this probably 4 or 5 times a day whenever they go to class. You feel responsible for lots of things until you get into the classroom, and the moment you get into the classroom, you see the professor as being responsible for the very thing you were just responsible for. I had this really, really strongly when I was, as a grad student. I was teaching a class, and then 10 minutes later, I was a student in someone else's class. So for an hour, if the lights were not working, if it was too warm in the room, if the windows needed to be opened or closed, everybody would look to me, and I would feel like I needed to do something about it. And then I would walk across the hall and sit down, and if the windows weren't needed to be opened, or if it was too hot or too cold or whatever it was, I knew it was someone else's responsibility. So our sense of what we are responsible for changes and can be changed in really profound ways very simply. So the reason I like to tell the story about the looking out on my lawn is all that it takes for me to no longer feel responsible for picking up that piece of trash, which I know is trash. I saw the garbage truck as it was driving away and saw this piece of trash land on my lawn. All that needs to happen is it needs to go, my lawn has an area where it's connected lawn to someone else's. I know that because my lawn is always like this and theirs is over. So it goes right over the high uncut grass, right into the really neat cut grass, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, I'm done. And there are other ways, of course, that responsibility, that we can be made to experience ourselves as no longer responsible. Some of them are not problematic. Some of them are actually things that we want. So if you're a young child and your parent, and there's something going wrong, your parent takes responsibility because they're the one who can take responsibility, and that's how it should be. What I want us to be careful of, though, and what I want us to think about is when our sense of our responsibility is being manipulated in more nefarious ways and more nefarious times. And I think that being part of a bureaucracy can often lead to that. The goal of a bureaucracy is efficiency. And if the goal of a bureaucracy is efficiency, one of the key ways that efficiency gets accomplished in a bureaucracy is, in fact, to create a responsibility. So you don't feel responsible for everything that goes on. You only feel responsible for a small amount of what goes on. And this connects, of course, to the final story I told about being part of this company. What would it mean to reject a responsibility? What would it mean to say, no, I know that the structure here encourages me not to be responsible, but I will be responsible anyway. And that, I think, is this really profound and simple notion that I was part of this company, and one of the things that was amazing about this company was the rule was, and the society, the culture of that group was, that we are all co-responsible. So that when something goes wrong, you don't say, no, it was his fault, or no, it was her fault. But rather, someone calls up and says, I've got a problem. You say, I was the one who caused the problem. How can I help you? How can I fix it? How can I make it right? And I would suggest that this is an important lesson about what I would say a different kind of mindfulness looks like, which is a mindfulness about how our understanding of what we are responsible for and what we're not responsible for can be changed by others, is changed by ourselves, and how we can respond to it in positive ways. Thank you.